I have a personal connection to each of my stories, so it's not like I choose a genre and stay with it. I find a story that's interesting to me and I write the book about it. Well, Bay State Skye is my 5th book, and I wanted to just read you what Publishers Weekly reviewed it, and there's one line in it that's really cool. Petrie's novel includes fascinating details about both the fishing industry and market. Readers will find themselves caught up in the stormy excitement and tantalizing touch of mystery. I really like that line because it really summed up what the book was about, because there's definitely a story, and there's a surprise ending you're not going to see coming. But in the meantime, while you're reading the book, you're learning a lot about the fishing industry in the Cape Ann area. And anytime I write a book, I'd like people, when they put the book down, when they finished it, to at least have learned one thing that they didn't know before they picked the book up. And I guess that's the teacher in me. But, so, I worked for Steve Conley Seafood for 8 years as an assistant plant manager, and I got a lot of connections with a lot of different people in the industry. And so I decided to see if there was a book somewhere there. And so I interviewed a lot of lobster fishermen and seafood processors. And one question I asked the lobster fishermen, just so that I thought it would just be an icebreaker. What was your best day fishing, and what was your worst day fishing? And they actually provided me with the theme of the book, because their best day fishing was, of course, the day they caught a lot of lobsters. They were killing it, and they came in just loaded with lobsters. The worst day? Now, I thought they were going to say when I didn't catch a lot of lobsters. The water was cold, it didn't warm up, starting the summer, it just was cold, and lobsters weren't moving, they weren't going into the traps, and we didn't catch anything that day. That's not what they said. They said their worst day of fishing was when they lost gear, lobster traps, trawl lines, the things they need to fish. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if they don't catch a lot of lobsters one day, then they just bait their traps, throw them back in. Tomorrow's a new day. It might be better. But if they don't have those traps to bait, if they don't have those trawl lines, they can't fish. They can't fish for a day, maybe a week, maybe a month, depending on how much gear they've lost. How do fishermen lose gear? Well, they can lose gear in storms, or they can lose gears when dragger boats drag through the lines and destroy their gear. So I thought that was a really interesting idea that I wanted to explore in this book. There's also another, and I also, I looked at what books were out there, and there's tons of treachery at sea, the perfect storm and all that, when, they go out and they get a storm, bruise up, and it's perilous and awful, and it is, for sure. But there were so many of those books done, I didn't want to do a book like that. I wanted to encompass the entire industry, not just the fishing end of the industry. And I also wanted to immerse people into Cape Ann, the culture, the history, all the cool, unique events that they have here that you won't find anywhere else in the country. And Book Life actually wrote a review of the book and said, this memorable book stands apart, an intricately planned historical immersion in Cape Ann that will make an indelible impression on a jaded connoisseur of adventure novels. So they got it, and that was really great. So the one story I wanted to get into this book was when the dehydration plant closed at the State Fish Pier. I guess it smelled. It probably did. And the state shut it down. What the state should have done is just find the owner, told him what he needed to do to make improvements, such as put a cooler in so when they dropped off the gurry, those fish heads and wraps and tails that are byproducts of the fish processing process, then that it stayed cool, it wouldn't have smelled so bad. It would have smelled a little because they're still cooking the fish byproducts to make, to dehydrate them basically. So, but the state didn't do that. They just shut it down cold. Cut the legs right off of the seafood processors in Gloucester and the area. So the way that they responded was they formed together. They formed the New England Fish Processors Association. and Steve Conley of Conley Seafood was the head of it. And so the first thing they were going to do is pool their money and see if they could buy the dehydrator plant, because that made the most sense. It was owned by a chicken farmer in Maine, believe it or not, and they thought, why would you let a chicken farmer in Maine have control over something that's so darned important to the fishing industry? And so they wanted to take it over, and they got to the point where they were at the table and they were just about ready to do the deal, and the deal fell through. And now they didn't have a dehydration plant anymore. So Conley thought and thought, and he thought, well, this isn't Gloucester's problem, this is the state's problem. Governor Dukakis should get involved. So he called Governor Dukakis' office and talked to one of the aides, and he presented the idea to the governor, and the governor got back in a couple of days through the aide and said, yeah, that sounds awful, I'm so sorry, but we don't have any money in the discretionary fund to fund that. And what they were going to do was they contacted the EPA, got a location where they could go and dump the gurry, way, way, way offshore, miles out. But they needed a tugboat and barge combination. And every time that tugboat and barge combination went out, it was $10,000. So it was going to add up really, really quickly. Well, the governor wouldn't pay up. Now, Conley, he's a little discouraged, doesn't know what to do, maybe a little desperate, possibly a little angry. So he went down to the auction house the next day, and he gathered as many New England fish processors that were part of the association as he could, and he told them, I have a plan. I'm about to send word to the governor's office that unless I've received a letter signed by the governor by 11 o'clock this morning, we're going to dump the gurry on the governor's lawn. And we're going to have the Boston Fish Party. Have you heard of the Boston Tea Party? This is going to be the Boston Fish Party. And it's going to be the governor's Boston Fish Party. Well, the New England fish processors loved that idea. So Conley got a guy named Vinny, who was very, very used to transporting gurry, and they got some rubber gasket material to cover up any little cracks or anything in his dump body that something might ooze out of. And once he got that in, filled the whole dump body with month-old gurry that had been sitting out in the sun, along with a few maggots and flies and things like that. Oh, it's a wonderful thing. And then they put a layer of ice on top of the dump bed. And then he covered all nice and tidy with a tarp. And he drove to Beacon Hill and sat a couple of blocks away from the steakhouse. There was one other person needed. He needed somebody to go and sit outside the governor's office and wait for that all-important letter to come through. Well, he got one of his workers to do that. And Denny wasn't really thrilled with having the job to do that, but he didn't really feel he could say no, number one, because he was an employee, and number two, of course the governor's going to come through with a letter. How could he not? So he goes, he sits outside the governor's office, and he's pretty content until around 10 minutes of 11. And then he started thinking, maybe I shouldn't have said yes. Maybe I should have told Conley no. I've never been to jail. Maybe they'll arrest me. I wonder what jail is like. And he was going down the rabbit hole around 2 minutes to 11 when finally the governor, his aide, came out with a letter for Denny. Well, Denny was so relieved, but now he's remembering the time. And Vinny's parked over there at 11 o'clock. He's going to dump the gurry. Well, Denny ran to find a phone because in these days, everybody didn't have a phone in their pocket. You had to find a payphone. And he finally found a bank of payphones that were all occupied except for one that was out of order. And he's standing there waiting and dying inside. And he didn't know if he should maybe go outside and run and flag Vinny down, if he saw the truck coming, and say, don't dump it. But just when he was about to run out the door, somebody got off the phone. And he called Conley and said, I have the letter. Well, Conley was really just as relieved as Denny to have the letter because that was the ultimate goal. Well, Vinny had a bag phone in his truck, and Conley called Vinny and said, okay, it's off, we've got the letter, this is great, we've got what we wanted. And so Vinny was not so happy. Number one, he really would have liked to dump that gummy because it would have been so much fun to see the reaction of everybody, even if it meant that he would go to jail, because it wouldn't have been his first time anyway. And secondly, now he has to take that darn dump truck full of ghosts, gurry full of, teeming with maggots and flies and things, back up to Gloucester, dump it back in the pile when he was so thrilled to be getting rid of some of it, and then clean out his truck. So that was the story of the that's just one part of it, of the dehydration plant. And people who've read the book have said it's hilarious what they did to try to solve this problem.